Hello everyone, I am Ankit and this is StudyIQ IAS. And in today's video, we are going to talk about a significant judgment of the Supreme Court, that is the case of Champakam Dorairajan versus State of Madras. But to understand this case, we have to go back in time, that is in 1940s, to understand both the context as well as the background of this case. Now in India of 1940s, back in State of Madras, there was this woman known as Srimati Champakam Dorairajan, and she always wanted to become a doctor, which was pretty an unusual dream for a married woman in India of 1940s. However, when she realized that the government order, it came into her own way of realizing the dream of becoming a doctor, she decided to challenge this government order into the court of law. And this case eventually became the Champakam Dorairajan case. Now the background of this case is that in 1948, the Madras government, it introduced a communal general order which was commonly referred to as communal GO. Now as per this order, the admissions into state-run educational institutions, they were apportioned based on the basis of caste. So for example, out of every 14 medical seats into the state of Madras, 6 were to be allocated to non-Brahmin Hindus, whereas 2 seats each were given to backward classes Hindus, Brahmins as well as members of scheduled caste. Whereas 1 seats each were provided to Anglo-Indians or Indian Christians and Muslims respectively. So when Champakam Dorairajan, she realized that as a Brahmin woman, she had little to no chance of being admitted into a medical college, she decided to move to Madras High Court. And her case, it actually highlighted that the government's policy or government order, it violated her right to equality. And as a result, this Srimati Champakam Dorairajan case, it became the first case in India's independent history to test whether or not India's constitution, it actually provided for a caste-based reservation for admissions in educational institutions. So in this regard, let us try to understand what actually did the courts have to say about this particular case. Now, as I told you, this case went to the Madras High Court, and Madras High Court, it actually struck down this government communal order, and it stated that this actually violated the fundamental right of Mrs. Champakam Dorairajan. However, later on, the state government of Madras, it referred this case to the apex court of the country, that is Supreme Court of India. And about a year later, in 1951, the Supreme Court of India, with a 5-judge constitutional bench, it actually declared this law as an unconstitutional law. And this was based on the fact that the classification in the law, that is reservation on the basis of caste, it actually clearly violated the fundamental rights which are guaranteed to citizens of India, one of which is right to equality. So in this regard, before understanding the nuances of the case, let us first understand what does Indian Constitution has to say about equality, reservation or admissions into the educational institutions. For example, you may have heard about Article 14, right? And this Article 14, it actually recognizes your right to equality, that is both equality in front of law and equal protection of law. On the other hand, Article 15, subsection 1, it prohibits discrimination solely on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or even place of birth. Whereas on the other hand, Article 29, subsection 2, it ensures that when educational institutions, they are admitting students into them, therefore, no citizens of India, they can be denied entry into those educational institutions which are either state supported or run by state on the basis of caste, religion or even language. But it wasn't the case back then that Constitution of India did not provide it reservation at all. If you look at Article 16, subsection 4 of the Constitution, it provided for reservation to different classes of citizens who are actually backward in case of reservations in case of public employment. So this was not the case that actually back then Constitution did not provide reservations at all. However, if you look at the provisions of the Indian Constitution, here reservation were expressly provided in cases of public employment and not in cases of admissions into educational institutions. And this became the point of contention as far as this case was concerned. Now in this regard, both of the parties, that is Mrs. Champakam Dorairajan as well as State of Madras, they went to the courts. Whereas on the one hand, the petitioner, that was Srimati Champakam Dorairajan, she highlighted that when the state, it discriminated against her caste in providing her the admissions into the educational institution, it actually violated her right to equality under Article 15, which actually prohibits discrimination of an individual on the basis of their caste. On the other hand, she said that when a state-run educational institution under Article 29 subsection 2, it provides that no discrimination can be made on the basis of religion, caste or language, and in that case, when she was denied an admissions into the state-run educational institution, it actually denied her the opportunity to get herself educated in the medical college. So this was the cause of grievance as far as Mrs. Champakam Dorairajan was concerned, that it violated her equality. Also, it denied her the admissions into the state-run educational institution solely on her basis of caste. Now let us understand what the State of Madras had to say about it. Now the State of Madras, it stated that its reservation-based policy, which discriminated against caste of a person in order to admit them into the educational institution, it actually was a policy of social justice, which was provided under Article 46 of the Indian Constitution. Because if you read Article 46 of the Indian Constitution, it states that the state has the prerogative of undertaking welfare of different classes of citizens, particularly the weaker sections. And it also included scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. So according to the State of Madras, this policy actually was in line of social justice and met the conditions that were laid down under Article 46 of the Constitution. Also, the State of Madras, it stated that directive principles, it actually was the guiding force behind the move of the government. Because this directive principles, it highlights the broader objectives of reducing the educational disparity and also achieving social justice when it comes to dealing with the weaker sections of the society. And also the government highlighted that although there was this no express provisions for providing of reservations in educational institution, however, in that case, the Supreme Court or the Madras High Court for that matter should not look into the letter of the Constitution. Rather, it should look at the spirit of the Constitution. That although Constitution provides for reservations in public employment, so why can't Constitution allow for reservations even in admissions to education institution, right? So this was the argument that was given by the State of Madras into the courts, that its policy actually went towards ensuring social justice. It actually was the directive principles that was the guiding force behind this movement, and therefore such policies cannot be declared as unconstitutional. But now I've told you that the Supreme Court and both Madras High Court, they both declared this policy as unconstitutional. So when this matter was heard in the Supreme Court, the fundamental question in front of the Supreme Court was that whether or not reservation policy, which was based on caste, it could or it could not override the fundamental rights of right to equality and non-discrimination, which are enshrined into the Indian Constitution. So the ruling of the courts in that regard, it upheld the decisions of Madras High Court. What was the decision of Madras High Court? It had declared this government order as unconstitutional, and even the Supreme Court held that the decision of Madras High Court in this regard was right. Because first of all, fundamental right of a citizen, it should take precedence over other factors. That is fundamental right, which are guaranteed under Article 15, which are guaranteed under Article 29, and these articles provide for non-discrimination of a person based on their caste. Also, as per the argument of the State of Madras, that it said that it were actually implementing the directive principles of state policy. And in this regard, the Supreme Court highlighted that you can actually implement DPSPs, but these DPSPs, they can't actually override the fundamental rights. Therefore, according to the Supreme Court of India, the precedence as far as fundamental right and DPSP are concerned, the precedence given to the fundamental right was higher when compared to the DPSPs. So this was the judgment of the Supreme Court of India. Now, what was the consequence of this judgment? If you look at the time after this judgment was given by the Supreme Court, the government of India, it brought first amendment to the Constitution of India back in 1951. And among many provisions of the first amendment, The important provisions for our today's discussion is introduction of Article 15 subsection 4 into the Indian Constitution, and this article, it actually provides state the right to make laws or introduce any special provision for advancement of any socially or educationally backward classes of citizen, particularly that of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. So now there is an express provision in the Indian Constitution that provides the opportunity for the government to introduce any reservation based policy to allow admissions into state run educational institutions. Also, if you look at the judgments given by Supreme Court after this case, you will find that the precedence that was given by the Supreme Court in Champakam Dorairajan case to fundamental rights over DPSP, it was significantly watered down later on. For example, you will see courts have allowed encroachment of fundamental right to give effect to some kind of directive principles. For example, if you look at Article 48 of the Indian Constitution of DPSP, it states or it allows the state to ban slaughter of cows. And this actual banning of slaughter of cows have been allowed in many states, which actually balances the right of a person with right to carry trade and occupation with that of their religious sentiments. Also, as we have discussed many times, many important policies like land reforms policies, which were a measure of social welfare, they were allowed and they were balanced with right to ensure or right to have a property. So this is how later on we have seen that the Supreme Court of India has not actually subscribed to the formal notions of equality. What is formal notions of equality? That is a portion of absolute equality. Rather, later on, what we have realized that the Supreme Court has actually vouched for substantive concept of equality. What is substantive concept of equality? These concept of equality, it takes into account different backgrounds of individual, historical injustices that both individuals or a group might have faced in their history, and taking this into account, it allows the government to bring policies of affirmative action like reservation policies. Because this actually takes into account that not everybody is on an equal pedestal. Because if a section is a weaker section, you have to actually compensate them in order to make them par with the normal sections of society. So this was the implication and the nuances of a popular Supreme Court judgment of the Champakam Dorairajan case. Stay tuned to our channel and do not forget to subscribe to us if you want to get notified about important such similar videos in future. So please give me permission. I'll take your leave now.